Hello. We're live. All right. So we are bringing in a new year now. And I need to finish up this information I was giving on the true history of the Americas. I can hear the fireworks outside. But yeah, these are some things that I've been needing to put down. So I need, hey, Queen. So, Enrique, that's my amigo in, I think, Brazil. But anyway, so yeah, I need to finish up this stuff because, you know, we've been going through this history and I've had my video to cut off. Yeah, it's tripping. So my video has been tripping on me a little bit. So, but I'm going to get this done because I want, I've been needing to take some time, and I had somebody to put a kind of a spur under my butt when they said something about the Moors and how. Okay, look, let me just say this because I don't want it to seem as though I am a hater of the Moors. I am not. What I am is a proponent for the facts and the truth about what really went down in history. And we've got a lot of misinformation going on within a lot of these Moorish groups. They're just not being honest and not telling the truth about what happened. So the thing is, what I'm finding is very similar to what the Albion does to melanated people in history, is they'll clump them all into one group, or clump people into one group or one name, and then they won't distinguish between the different groups. And so then we've got a mistelling of what really went down in history. And the same thing is going on with the Moors, where they're now coming in giving this story and this narrative. And they're saying, oh yeah, everybody was Moors. Everybody was Moors. It was the Moors and 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 the Moors, and they're all the same. They're not. They're not the same. And so we've got to separate this, because I'm not trying to, I know it's going to be, oh, you're being a separatist. We all just need to come together. Well, you need to understand that just because we all have brown skin, that does not make us all the same people. That does not make us all family. It doesn't. I know you want to think that and believe that, but until the truth comes out and we separate these people and understand who's who did what, when they did it, and why, then we're not going to be able to move forward. This is why we stay back and we keep trying to go in circles. So the thing that was said is, oh, well, the Moors were trying to mate with the Albion women, because what we're going to get into it later. But this is what was said that made me go, really? Is anybody buying this? But that the Moors mated with the Caucasian woman because he wanted to mate them off the planet, as if he was doing some kind of justice or service to the planet. Okay, that's bullshit. All right, now, I talked about in the previous video that cut off, and I won't go back through it again, about Columbus and the 1400s and the original tribes being matriarchal. All right, so I won't go back through that. Go and check out that video because I go through it a little bit. I don't go into depth, but I do speak on it and why Columbus was likely not a Caucasian. And that's important for us to understand, because we need to know who these characters are. And that the vast majority of the characters that we're dealing with, they were melanated people. They were different groups of melanated people, and we need to know who's who. So let me go into the 1600s, because I started talking about the British and how by that time they were in the land, in the Americas, and they were doing business with the original Americans. Now, I call these people original Americans, and I do not use the term aboriginal, because ab means not. All right, so they were the original Americans. Who were the original Americans? They were the people running around calling themselves Black and African American today. The original Americans were melanated people. They were not the people who we see as that they put up in our face, that the media shows as Indians and Aboriginals and all that. Those are not the original. Those stringy hair, those, no. The original Americans, they had woolly hair like this, like this, right? They were copper colored like this. As a matter of fact, the term America, Ameri is a Hebrew term. It means copper colored. Ika means land of the indigenous people. America means land of the copper colored people. All right. So when we understand these, etymologies and certain other things, then we can start to piece together a lot of this stuff that went down. Now, I'm talking about the 1600s and the Virginia Company for the simple fact that the Virginia Company is the same company that we know today as the state of Virginia. It is a company. And so what the British were doing is they were setting up corporations or companies when they came into the Americas, and they were actually doing treaties and business with the original Americans. So what was going on is that all of this stuff was being documented. Now, as a matter of fact, while I'm here, I want to go ahead and post some of those treaties, because when we start looking at these treaties, then we can hear the ancestors talking about what really went down at that time. Now, the reason why I'm posting these also is because I want you to go and do your research, pull up these treaties, and then see what was really going on and how the British were making deals and trying to draw the original Americans into contracting with them. So when we read these treaties, what we're going to find is that the original Americans were making these, our ancestors, our ancestors who weren't calling themselves African American and Negro and black and colored and all of that, they were making deals whereby they made themselves subject to Britain. Now, let's understand this. At this time, the British that were coming over, they were melanated people, and they were called Moors. They were calling themselves Moors. Now, the term Moor, and I'm going to go into this real quick, it is a verb, and it comes from the term mooring, like something you do on a ship. All right, because most of the people that were coming to the Americas, they were sailors. They were Moors, and Moors, all the people who were on the ships were called Moors. Why? Because they did jobs that pertain to what people do on a ship, mooring. So look up the term mooring or moored, M-O-O-R-E-D. So these people, then they started being called this term, and because most of them were melanated, they started calling, the term became synonymous with melanated people. All right, mooring, that's a term synonymous with melanated people, only because the vast majority of them, the sailors, were melanated. So you got these British Moors coming into the country, and again, these were melanated people, and they were doing business with the original Americans. And so the original Americans, the British had made contracts with them whereby the original Americans agreed to be subjects. Okay, they agreed, okay, we're going to be subject to Britain, we're going to pay taxes, we're going to allow you all to make rules, allow Britain to make rules, and we're going to be subject. However, the land stays in the name of the original people of the land. So here today, to this day, the land is still in the name of the original people of the Americas. It's in land patents, and England still does not have her hands on it. So I'm wanting to move up to what's going on today, because until we understand what happened back then, we're going to stay in circles. Now, understand, I just said the land patents are in the name of the original Americans. Well, if you are not taking on the name of the original American, you can't be claiming no land patent. And the original Americans were not calling themselves Moor. They had names. They had family names. And those are the names that we are supposed to be using. And if we're going to honor our ancestors, you honor them by calling their names. Read the patents. so you can understand who our ancestors were in this land. Now, let me move on, Woolside, because when we're talking about those treaties, then we can once again start to understand what kind of bad deals the original people made. And we can also understand who the original colonists were in those, all of those colonies, from Virginia all the way down to Georgia and everybody in between. We can understand who the original colonists were. They were the original Americans. That's who the original colonists were. They were not Caucasians that were shipping over here and, you know, sipping tea and, you know, coming to live in the new world. No, the original colonists were the original Americans, because they were suckered into making bad deals with Britain. So I just need to make that clear. They weren't Caucasians. They weren't no darn pilgrims with non-melanated skin. They was colored, melanated people. I didn't say color, excuse me for saying color. They were melanated people. And so they were over in the land. The Britons were doing business in the land, and they had made treaties. The reason why I posted those treaties so that you can go and look up for yourself is because, see, for me, when I do research, I do not be reading people's books and their opinions on what they said happened. I want to hear my ancestors speak. And when you read the real treaties and the original treaties that were created by the original people of the land, you can hear them speak. So I don't have to get somebody else's story. My ancestors are talking. And you can hear it when you go and do your research and look up those treaties and see what was really going on. So, and we've got the brutish Moors, and I call them brutish Britain Moors. They were bringing in Caucasians or Albions as slaves, okay? This is one of the things that's not talked about in history. Go and look up white slaves in America. Look up what was going on with Staten Island. Look that up. Look up, we're going to get into this later, but just those for right now. You can go and look those up, because the British Moors were kidnapping Caucasian children from places like Sicily, Ireland, Europa or Europe, which was really Africa at the time. And they were kidnapping them and bringing them over into the Americas as slaves. Okay, the original slaves were Albions, non-melanated people. As a matter of fact, let's talk about the term slave and where it comes from. Slave is derived from the terms Slavic or Slovakian. All right, those are non-melanated people. And those were the original slaves that they were bringing into the country. Who were they selling those slaves to? The original Americans, who were the original colonists in these colonies that were being set up by Britain. Again, these colonies are nothing more than companies. And so you've got the British that have set these colonies up, and the colonists are the melanated people, and they're bringing in these slaves that they're kidnapping from all over the place. Caucasians, children, and they're selling them in the land. Now, I need to state right here, because I normally speak a lot on universal laws. And I spoke earlier about why we keep going in circles and why it's important to know who did what, when, to whom. Because one of the things about universal laws is that whatever energy you put out must come back. Now, we keep hearing the narrative, oh, our ancestors did something negative, and so we're paying for what they did. Let me help you understand something. You are your ancestors, all right? You did it. You might not remember it, because we don't understand that we're spirits that keep recycling back into here. And until we understand what energies we put out, and we show respect the energies that we put out, and pay for the energies that we put out, we're going to keep going in circles. All right, so I needed to say that, so that as we go along and we continue with this understanding of what really happened in history, and you can, again, don't believe anything I say, do your own research, and then you come back and let's have an informed conversation of what really went down. All right, so you've got, like I said, the British Moors bringing in these Caucasian children and selling them as slaves in the Americas. Now, all the way, we go all the way up until, let's go up until the 1770s, when the constitutions come into play. Now, the organic constitution, let's understand, all the constitutions, they come from the laws of the original tribes. Now, I mentioned earlier in the previous video that the vast majority of the tribes in the Americas, and in the 1400s and even the 1600s, when the British came on the scene, were matriarchal. And in this situation, the women were the ones who made the laws. Now, the laws in the Constitution are laws that had been going on since before the organic Constitution, or, you know, the Constitution, what we call the Constitution for the United States of America. That's the organic Constitution. There's what everybody knows is the Constitution of the United States of America. That's the fraudulent Constitution. I won't get into that on this one, but what we need to understand is that the organic Constitution, those are laws that are taken from the laws that the women who were running the tribes had been using those to govern tribes as far north as what we know as Canada, and as far south as what we know as Texas, or excuse me, Mexico. So they had been using these laws. And so the organic Constitution, when it was created, it is a take off of those laws that the original women had already put into play. So now let's understand how, because again, in the 1600s, you had the Virginia Company. The colonies were already being set up. But why did the United States of America, why did this come into play? Okay, in 1777, what we need to understand is that another group of Moors had come into the Americas, North America, and really had kind of bled down into South America as well. But there was a group of Moors from Morocco that had come into the Americas and had started establishing governments. Now remember, Britain was already in the land doing business. They had made treaties, but these Moors were trying to set up government on top of what Britain was already doing. So now they come in and they establish things like your counties. All of your counties are set up by Moors. And the term county comes from counting things, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So they keep account of who owns this land and keep account of who the people are in the land. So that's where the counties come from, the Moors. So you got a group of I would call them I'm gonna say stray Moors, because it wasn't like they were trying to set up government on behalf of Morocco, but wolves in the land. So they're setting up these counties, and they've started to set up different governments. Now, what ended up happening, see, this is how we know. Let me tell you something. I just named 3 different melanated people in the country running things. You got your original Americans, you got your British Moors who were already in the land in the 1600s, and then you got your Moroccan Moors who came on the scene. Now, when exactly they came on the scene, that's another story, but we know it didn't happen before 1400s. So when in 1777, there's a contract that comes, this Constitution, or as a matter of fact, before that, there was the Declaration of Independence, where it was a declaration that the Americans were separating from Britain. Well, the question needs to become, who was actually separating from Britain? because these Moroccans that were in, they weren't, that were from Morocco running the United States of America government. They weren't a part of Britain. But what they were is the British had subjected all of the people of the land to these laws. And so at this point, it was let's create a document where we separate from Britain. Everything is separated, and we're not accepting their rule in this land anymore. So that's where the Declaration of Independence come into play. But let's take a look at the Declaration of Independence real quick, and you please pull it up. Now, the Declaration of Independence is like a treaty to some degree. It's we the people saying we're not taking the British rule anymore. Well, the thing is that declaration dealt with the land of the Americas, and anything dealing with the land of the Americas has to be signed. If it's a contract, because the Declaration of Independence is like a contract, it has to be signed by the original people of the land. Otherwise, it's not a valid contract. All right, you can't make a treaty, a contract, anything dealing with the land unless the original people of that land sign that contract. Now, when we go back and look at the Declaration of Independence, we see that there are no original Americans that signed the Declaration of Independence. Pull it up, see the names, look in the treaties of the people whose name the land is in, and find what their names are. You won't find a Scott, a Smith, a Thomas, a Williams, a Jefferson, none of that. You're going to find original names of the original people. And the fact that none of them are on the Declaration of Independence, that's indicative that the original people didn't sign that contract. And so it's not valid. Let's go on. Let's look at the not only the Declaration, the Constitution. Look at the Constitution. Now, the thing about the Constitution is the same. This Constitution was brought into play to say, all right, these are the laws of this corporation. Now, the United States of America is supposedly incorporated, or was incorporated, the United States of America. Notice as upper and lowercase letters. Now, I'm not talking about the all capital letter United States right now, but the United States of America, upper and lowercase, was supposedly the government, the republic supposed government was established in 1777. It was supposedly incorporated in 1777. Now, the deal about this thing is that, and I've had to ask this question, well, who owned it? Who owned it? Because if the original people owned it, well, they couldn't have owned it. I'll tell you why. Because when you go and look at the Constitution, you're going to see the names on there. You won't find not one original American name. You're not going to find it. Again, I know Smiths and Jeffersons and Jacksons and Hancocks. None of those are the original Americans. Those